Among the many types of nightmares the Vietnam War could provide, fighting in the tunnels was truly the worst possible. For year after year of the conflict, brave men brawled with their death time and time again, as the earth itself grumbled around them, threatening to swallow them whole. They weren't just ascending into a battle, they were entering hunting grounds. Silent predators waited for them, bearing fangs filled with lethal venom. These were the deadly Vietnam snakes, and the Vietcong knew just how to use them. Slithering paranoia. More than 200 species of snake populate the Vietnam countryside, many among them capable of killing a man with their venomous bite. An untold number of these creatures can be found there even today, lying in wait in the jungle, or more often than not, slithering underground. To snakes, underground caves are a paradise. Damp, tight spaces are their natural habitat, where they can feel safe from airborne predators, and where they can find many of their chosen prey. Farmers moving soil in Vietnam today handle hundreds of snakes every day, just by digging barely a meter into the ground. The war was different. When war raged and US tanks rolled in the fields, humans entered the snake's domain and often ended up as prey themselves. American soldiers fighting in the jungle had many nicknames for snakes lying around. A terrifying encounter with these predators was, after all, a common experience in those times. They found them in their backpacks, after placing them on the ground for just a few minutes. They found them in their beds, dangling from the doors of their barracks, in their bathrooms. One, among the many, was particularly feared: the two-step snake. The nickname explains itself. After a bite of this creature, one has but 2 steps before his body collapses. But what is the two-step snake? Bungarus multicinctus, also known as the many-banded krait, is a nocturnal predator, clearly recognized by its black and white stripes. While extremely dangerous, this snake's venom can only kill a man after hours and hours of horrible pain, as the body slowly shuts down. A well-known herpetologist, Joe Slavinsky, died after being bitten by a many-banded krait in 2001, after 29 hours of agony. While still lethal, it's clear that the soldiers fighting in the Vietnam War overestimated how deadly this venom was. Why? The answer is simple: fear and paranoia. Vietnam is a difficult battlefield by itself, but most of the time snakes didn't always find their way into biting American soldiers on their own. Men placed them there. The Vietcong attrition strategy was simple: avoid direct contact as much as possible, and keep the enemy into a continuous state of danger. Traps, snipers, ambushes, and, of course, venomous snakes could be everywhere, and were strategically positioned to ensure that pressure was always, constantly applied to the minds of all American soldiers. Of course, natural encounters were already terrifying by themselves. James Jim Kraut, who served in Vietnam between 1966 and 1968, experienced this kind of fear firsthand. During his first tour, a many-banded krait tried, by itself, to board the hospital ship he was guarding, until Kraut was forced to shoot it in order to stop it. Others found similarly persistent two-step snakes in their helicopter mid-flight. True terror, though, was waiting below, underground. Tunnel rats. As we've already seen, the surface wasn't where the worst of the snake problem could be found, and unfortunately, sometimes in a war such as Vietnam, men had to crawl into the bowels of the earth in order to find their enemies. Unable to confront the American firepower head-on, both North Vietnamese forces and Vietcong guerrillas worked tirelessly in order to create one of the largest and most famous tunnel networks in military history. These contemporary catacombs spread all around Vietnam, allowing them to store weapons and ammo safely, or to disappear as if they were never there to begin with, to retreat from an unwinnable fight. These tunnels were tight underground spaces where life was difficult and dangerous even to those who built them in the first place. Air was scarce, damp and hot at all times, making every breath difficult and uncomfortable. And cave-ins were common, especially when intense fighting was going on the surface. While living in the tunnels was awful, their existence was a continuous thorn in the side of the American forces. Tunnels meant easy resupply and easy hiding spots for the ever-moving Vietcong guerrillas, and in the north of the country were used as part of the famous Ho Chi Minh Trail, the secret logistical network that continuously brought supplies to the various NVA-friendly forces operating in the south. The tunnels could not be ignored. The American answer to the Vietnamese tunnels was to recruit men to clear them, one by one. This task, one of the most deadly in the entire war, was given to both soldiers and combat engineers with two very specific characteristics: being short and being brave enough to appear completely crazy to normal people. The tunnel rats, as the rest of the army called them, were tasked with entering the tunnel network armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pistol, usually an M1911 or an M1917 revolver. Fighting inside tunnels was a completely unique experience. Every round fired echoed all around, disorienting soldiers while the loose soil above them fell on them, disturbed by the shot. Combat was a continuous reciprocal ambush, but the Viet Cong had a clear advantage. They could prepare themselves. Traps were laid everywhere in the tunnels, but had to follow different standards from those used on the surface. Anything capable of causing a cave-in had to be carefully evaluated, and used only to bury the entire sub-network in case of complete loss of control. A single grenade could easily initiate a chain of destruction, burying both Americans and NVA troops forever, rendering the precious underground supplies useless. It's in this long war tunnel between Viet Cong and tunnel rats that snakes became a staple in the Viet Cong bag of tricks. Tunnels were already a perfect environment for the venomous snakes. They didn't suffer from the lack of clean air and wide spaces like their human neighbors, and were more than happy to hunt the many rats, beasts, and humans raiding the NVA food and supplies. They already populated most tunnels, biting anyone unlucky enough to reach for them in the darkness. And since many among the NVA forces had handled snakes for their entire life, it was only natural for them to begin thinking creatively. A snake pit trap could be created in a number of ways. The most simple one was to dig a hole in the floor of a small tunnel, where anyone passing through would be forced to crawl in complete darkness. Most of the Cu Chi tunnel network, among the most famous remnants of these incredible underground structures, was, at the time, only 2 feet by 3 feet, leaving almost no space to maneuver to anyone who didn't already know what he was doing. The tunnel rat would slide into the pit, finding a bed of snakes waiting for them. The Viet Cong only needed to feed the creatures in the pit to convince them to stay put. Claustrophobia. Tunnel rats suffered a casualty rate of 33%, a high number for a modern war, even in the midst of an incredibly violent conflict such as Vietnam. They were an imperfect solution to the immediate problem of denying supplies to the enemy, and had to do what they could with what they were given. As time passed, a specific culture developed among the members of this unexpected brotherhood. They would often jump into a tunnel to save other rats, or even just to complete their mission in order to retrieve the body of their comrade. Being that most of these men volunteered for the job, it's clear to those on the ground that the tunnel threat was one that needed to be solved, by any means necessary. Simple traps were not enough to fool these men, especially those who managed to gain field experience mission after mission. Tunnel rats quickly became accustomed to the underground fauna, even posing for incredible photos showing the absurdly large centipedes they would find in the tunnels. This meant that the Vietcong needed to up their game. Instead of just leaving snakes in a pit, the guerrilla fighters started creating a sack of snakes built into the roof of the tunnel itself. In other cases, smaller snakes, known to the Americans as bamboo vipers, would be pushed into hollow bamboo pieces and left in the walls of the tunnel. Fangs could strike from any direction, as the snakes didn't take kindly to being disturbed, and only those who had prepared the trap knew what path to take in order to avoid such deadly contraptions. Animals such as snakes and fire ants weren't always as deadly as one would imagine. A man could receive several bites and still be able to function. What they lacked in lethality, though, they more than made up for in their ability to cause panic. A tunnel rat who fell victim to these traps would immediately panic, scream, kick against the walls, signaling his position to anyone waiting for him. In a war where positioning and stealth were kings, one scream was all it would take to end even the toughest veteran. To a man bitten by a wild animal, reality matters little. The venom was often just implied. A non-venomous snake, even just a plain one, was perfectly able to deliver the lethal dose of terror Vietcongs were looking for. Just as modern soldiers started running from blades after gunpowder-based combat became a standard, men have a natural fear of being stabbed or cut that far exceeds the terror of being shot. Vietnam was a war of horror. The rules of war meant nothing to men who were fighting to the death, and in the depths of the tunnels, even the little sparks of mercy one could find on the surface disappeared, devoured by darkness. Tunnel rats died by snakebite or inhaling poison gas. They were impaled on spikes or drowned when the tunnel was flooded. No mercy was given by either side, as the rats would slaughter every single man they found on their deadly mission. They would shoot, stab, bite their way back to the surface, no matter what it took. Of course, tunnel rats weren't the only ones to fight to the bitter end. On the surface, among the jungle, men like Franklin D. Miller fought last stands worthy of a movie. Click if you want to hear his story, and the story of Mac v. Sog, the deadliest soldiers of the Vietnam War. And remember to subscribe for more.